what we're really going
Yeah.
to do is tackle a subject that I think is really top of mind for people in sales and sales enablement, learning and development, really across the board, which is, how do we retain those top performers we have? And what are the things we can do from a training, from a collaboration, from a learning and development standpoint to really support that? And some of the trends we're seeing, across both of our organizations. So we're going to start with the idea of, well, where are we, right, with this hybrid work, and how are things evolving? We want to hear from the audience today on that. And then we'll talk about some trends we've seen to attract and retain top sales talent, kind of what that looks like today and going forward in 2022 at least. And then how that relates to creating a coaching culture to continue to engage and really motivate the folks we have on board, and which is a key strategy to retention. So we'll make a little bit of a pivot there and really talk about why coaching is so important in this retention conversation, and then how we can implement that and how we can create a learning environment to really support that. So we've got a lot to cover, but let's go ahead and jump in here, Julie. And we're going to ask the group, and love to get your thoughts on this, but about the plans for on-site versus remote work this year. And I know you have some research, and we'll share some data along the way. But I think what we're hearing is it's pretty mixed. And even over the last few months, things have changed a little bit. And I'd love to know from the audience, if you wouldn't mind chatting in, what's your plan for on-site versus remote? Is it hybrid? Is it flexible? And we'll talk about how that relates to training as well. Julie, what are you seeing within your organization and across some of your clients?
Just a total mix, right? I think some organizations came back on site earlier than I thought they would. Others are completely shifting the way that they work to be remote. It's really just all over the place. And I think it is, the industry that you're in is definitely a factor in that, right? Being in software, we're kind of accustomed to being remote and sort of come and go in your jeans and your t-shirt as you please. So I might have a little bit of a different, lens on that, but definitely what I'm hearing is just, it's all over the place, right?
And that's what our audience is saying too. It's really interesting to look at this. Elena says on-site, Christine says on-site. Let me see, we have, I think those are the on-sites, but then we have a number that are remote. So Rocky says remote, Michael's mixed, Ellen's remote, Rochelle says mostly remote, Kevin says 50-50, depending on the customers, which I think is absolutely, we're kind of being driven. And Sarah, I think she captures that, right? It's hybrid, depending on, the office and kind of flexibility as we see that. So I think, when I've seen some of the research on this, it's interesting. It's like a third when they ask preferences. A third really do want to be back, and maybe their home situation isn't conducive, or they don't have a great space. And I think we all appreciate the in-person collaboration, but is that part-time, sometime, all the time? But it's a third want to be back, a third want flexibility, and a third just want to work from home and be fully remote. It seems like that's kind of what we're seeing. Are you seeing anything else in the chat here, Julie?
Yeah, just a lot of, it's really all over the place, like you're saying, right? I think what's interesting is I'm seeing some say it's sort of up to you. I am seeing more of that. And as it relates to something that we'll get to kind of in a minute here, right? But the demand from people and the job market that we're in, right? So a lot of organizations are sort of having to rethink maybe what they had intended to do for the year based on, attracting new talent and retaining the talent that they have and those preferences.
Yeah. And I think the takeaway message here is we need to continue to be flexible. We need to listen. And I will say in general, and we've had an opportunity to talk to a number of the sales leaders that are our clients this year about this topic. And they said, well, we're listening. And I think one thing we know is that just mandating, okay, everybody's going to be back, or we're doing all or nothing, people are in a different place than they were 2 years ago, and we need to listen and we need to adapt. So let's talk about this. I know you curated some content. I think this comes from McKinsey, but can you talk about, remote versus virtual and kind of some of the trends the industry's seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hate to say it. I hate to say it again because everybody's hearing this all over the place, right? But if you think about, the mass resignation, whatever you want to call it, right? I've heard it called the great reprioritization, the great reshuffling.
Right.
One that I liked was purposeful pause. What it really is just a radical rethinking of the way that we work. And then also, because of that, the way that we learn. So I think, Ray, you touched on this, right? The importance of being adaptable and of being flexible, because we're certainly not where we thought we'd be in 2022. I mean, maybe you have a magic 8 ball and you knew it was going to happen, but I didn't think we'd be here. We didn't think we'd be where we were in 2020 and 2021. So it's just, we've got to be open and we have to be adaptable. What I am seeing is that we originally went through this kind of quick digital transformation when the pandemic hit, right? Like we had all of this instructor-led training that was happening. All of a sudden, everyone's remote. What are we going to do with this training that we're planning on delivering this year? Well, we have to digitize it. And some of that was a little bit rushed and people went to whatever the easiest option was because they just had to get it out the door. So we went from this, like, I'll say digital transformation to more of a paradigm shift now that we've had a little bit of time and are thinking about, okay, what makes sense moving forward? How do people prefer to learn? And how do we meet people where they are remotely in the world? And what I'm seeing is learning come to be more at the center and the core of organizations, which for me and for a lot of the L&D people I work with is a really exciting time. And maybe it hasn't totally happened yet, but we're getting there. And you might be annoyed by this, Ray, but I'm going to throw out a Grey's Anatomy thing here because I do watch Grey's Anatomy, but they are always seeing, if any of you do, right, that they're always saying we're a teaching hospital. Like we made all these mistakes, whatever. We're a teaching hospital. We're a learning hospital. Like that is at the forefront of what we do. And it is an element in everything that we do. And I'm starting to see that more with learning. So, it's a weird time and we didn't think we were going to be here, but it's also kind of an exciting time.
Oh, and I love that analogy actually. And it really resonates. I know, our friends at Microsoft are fond of saying, hey, we're moving from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all culture. And that we should be that learning organization, right? Where we're going to learn by trying things out, by on the job, by peer-to-peer and coaching and collaboration, which we'll get to. But I think that's here to stay. And I know from our business, we went from primarily workshop driven, right? Whether in-person or VILT, to now a majority is a digital blend. And, not to say that SKOs, sales kickoff meetings or annual training events won't still happen, but I think they're going to be very discrete events, very focused, which I think is good, but followed along and maybe preceded by digital learning journeys, by more engagement, by more pull through. And I think that's a positive thing for the industry in general. So I think we're going to see this continue to evolve, but let's talk about what that means, for attracting and retaining talent, and then how that relates to training. So, one of the things we've had a chance to do this year is interview a number of sales leaders. And we talked about this issue about attraction and retention and some of the themes that have come out. And I think this is a really important slide because, what we heard is, well, people are leaving, they're getting a $20,000 raise, they're doubling their salaries. I mean, there's just crazy things out there. And, what's really interesting is, yes, there's definitely some comp inflation, but if you're trying to chase comp, it's already too late. And so, the idea that they may jump ship for more money, but if they're open to and having those conversations and they don't feel like they're getting taken care of in the current world, then you're probably not going to be able to keep up or throw enough money at them. And in fact, it's probably not a great strategy. So we need to be listening. And some of the themes that we heard is, reps today and I think employees in general, they do want to continue to grow their skills and they want to see what the path is for the future. So at least paint an opportunity. And we did a survey of a number of graduating seniors at the University of Washington in their sales program and asked them, hey, what was important to them? And really having a career path and understanding what the advancement looked like was at the top of the list in terms of how they were going to determine where they went. And these are, pretty highly sought after folks coming out of that program. So, I think we need to be looking at skilling. We need to be looking at the path and the advancement opportunities. And then we need to be having conversations, understanding what motivates the individual reps. And as Leah Clark, who is at GP Strategies, is fond of saying, 4 million people are resigning for 4 million different reasons. And, maybe there are themes, but we at least need to find out for that individual, is this a work-life balance? Is this a safety? Is this a diversity? Is this a opportunity? What are those things that are driving them to answer that recruiter's call? And so if we can get ahead of those by having conversations and thinking about building, and then it flows through at the bottom into, well, what does the work environment look like? And what's the relationship with their manager? So I'm sure you have some comments on these, but some pretty interesting themes that we're hearing. Are these consistent? And what else would you add to this, Julie?
Yeah, I would say that there's been a big change from learning being kind of an afterthought, where we've got talent in here right now. How do we develop these people, to the learners actually demanding that, right? So if we think again about attraction and retention, this is something that people are really asking for. I mean, they're looking at their organization and expecting their organization to give them the tools that they need to upskill and to reskill and to grow personally and professionally. And that creates stickiness for that person within the organization, right? And so what we're seeing is more and more individuals coming to us in their learning and development departments in their organization saying, okay, we really need to evolve our learning and development programs, because learning is now going to be at the center of what we do. And we need to think about talent management and how we're getting people to grow. Hopefully it's here, but maybe it's not here. But regardless, we need to provide those programs to these people that they want and that they need. And so it's just such a different place than we were, 3-4 years ago.
No, I think continuing to build on that and, learning in the flow of work. And, that's the other preference is, hey, people like to learn where they can apply. Don't put me in a boot camp for 3 weeks and force feed this, right? Because you walk out of there and you're like, what do I actually do? Versus, oh, let me shadow somebody. Let's have an activity I can go apply and come back and discuss with my peers. I mean, I think we'll see that continue to evolve. And I think that is pretty exciting. The last point on here I really wanted to touch, because it's really where we're headed, which is, for years we've known that typically people will make the decision based on their relationship with their manager at the end of the day. So all else being equal, what does that relationship look like? How do they feel about that? And the manager really determines a lot about, how engaged they are and how they feel about the job. So we want to think about what can we do to strengthen that relationship. And especially in these days of hybrid and remote work, what are we doing to continue to engage with our employees? So, let's talk about that idea of a coaching culture and, how we can create that, how we can reinforce it, how we can put that in place through some of the training. So we think that a coaching culture is even more important. It's always been super important, but we have both personal and business challenges that people are going through. And we know that, there are unique situations that people are trying to balance at home and with working spouses and kids at home and maybe in and out of remote schooling. So there are a lot of other things that have been put on top of their otherwise busy schedules. And we need to be sensitive to that. And I think coaching plays right in. And we need to really listen and understand where they're coming from. And at the same time, we're trying to grow our pipeline and kind of return to whatever normal is going to look like going forward. So how do we build if we, maybe we're a little bit stagnant over the last few years, or we're coming out and hopefully growing? We have to now do even more to grow that pipeline. And we need to be able to coach to improve performance and to help scale the team. So I think coaching plays into all of these factors and is a key really to that retention. And we know that it creates leverage. So, the idea that if a manager, we hear this in every one of our workshops, well, I don't have time to coach, or I'm too busy doing all these other things. I have meetings, I have reports, I have pipelines, I have all these things. I'm trying to close business. But the idea of coaching for the frontline manager is we want to help them solve their own problems, and we want to improve their skills. And we know from our research that as the skills improve, sales performance improves. So if we can hone in on those core skills and help them, we can actually improve the performance. And maybe we're spending less time in that urgent quadrant, right? Of swooping in to put out fires, to handle customer issues, or to have to close the deal every time because the rep isn't confident doing that, or isn't negotiating. So coaching helps to create that leverage and can pull through on higher retention rates. So, I know you've looked at a lot of different coaching programs as well, Julie, but how does this resonate? What else would you add to this in terms of, the importance of coaching in this culture?
Yeah, I would say that it's more important now than it has ever been, because people are really craving that interaction, and it's harder to get that remotely, right? Or even hybrid. I would also add that, coaching remotely is very different than coaching in person. So we have to be really mindful about how we're coaching remotely and make sure that we're set up with a digital environment that supports remote coaching, that feels very rich and meaningful. And I would also add that what I hear a lot from people is, okay, well, now we have this remote team, we don't have enough coaches, right? People who would typically be in a coaching role. So what do we do? How do we make sure that everyone's needs are met? And so what we're seeing is people being, much more focused in coaching, to your point, Ray, much more focused in any kind of live meeting and interactions that they have, virtual or otherwise. And also we're seeing people really scale coaching. And there's multiple ways to do that if you do it in a digital environment, right? Through some peer-to-peer coaching and other things as well that, we may not talk about today, but there's definitely ways to do that. And so I think, going back to what I said before, like just the remoteness in this hybrid world, like that changes coaching. And we really need to be thoughtful about that.
No, it's so important. And I think we heard that, as you're talking about initially, there was this pivot to, we've got to do everything online. And as you said, there were some speed bumps along the way, right? I mean, we had clients saying, hey, can you just take this 2-day program and turn it into a couple of webinars? And it's like, well,
right.
We can do that. Let's not call that training though. Right. And
everyone's going to hate it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we're not going to get behavior change. And I think the same with coaching. Right. We heard, well, we can't really coach, in a lot of industries, they're used to riding along for a full day, right? And having that windshield time or going to lunch and talking about those opportunities. And, especially in pharma or, maybe in industrial products where they're actually calling on the plants and going to the shop floors and making those rounds, that went away or at least has changed dramatically. But I think in some ways those are excuses, or we need to rethink how we're doing that, because I think, if we believe that coaching is important, there are ways that we can do that. And in some ways it opens up the opportunity to do more coaching and be more creative. And that's really what we want to talk about, is implementing that coaching culture. And then how do we actually train and create better coaches? So let's go there. I mean, we have this very simple model that we start our coaching programs around the coaching mindset. And I consider this kind of the Swiss Army knife of coaching, right? Because these are things that you can always step back. They kind of are used in multiple different situations. But the idea that you can always ask a question and then hopefully shut up long enough, right? But ask the question, get their input. How do you think that went? What might we do differently? How did you feel the client was engaged when you asked that question? So we're asking questions to see where they're coming from. We're using our active listening skills, right? So we're really leaning in, we're using empathy, we're paying attention, as opposed to, I'm just going to tell you what I already had in mind, right? Before you even opened your mouth. So we really need to practice those active listening skills, and ultimately assuming best intentions. And this may be the hardest of the 3 A's, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt let's assume they're trying to do a good job and help them get there, instead of the opposite of that is, well, they're screwing up, or they're lazy, or they're incompetent, or they're not going to get there, which really is a judgment that taints the way we show up as a coach. So let's try to assume, now they may prove us otherwise, but let's at least go in, assume they're trying to do a good job. And so these can be used in a number of different ways. And when we think about that coaching, to your point, Julie, about how can we engage in this hybrid world? What does coaching look like? I think there are lots of opportunities. We can coach before the call. Hey, I can't join you, but let's role play that beforehand. Let's go through your call plan. Let's anticipate those objections or those hard questions. So we can coach before. We can certainly join the virtual meeting. So popping in, even if you're not an active participant, these days it's not unusual to have an extra participant on there. Hey, I'm just observing, don't mind me, or I'm here to help. And frankly, nobody really thinks twice about it. So you can join purely as a coach, or a joint sales call where, okay, you kick off and cover the presentation, I'll handle the objections and the negotiation, or however, just make sure those roles are clear. And then I love the call recording, software like Gong that's giving you analytics and transcripts. You can go back and say, hey, let's both listen to this call, take away, what did you like? What might you do differently? And let's compare our notes. And boy, that's enlightening, right? That you're going to hear more from that analysis than if you just say, well, here are 3 things you should do differently next time, which, as we know, creates resistance and defensiveness. So, we can lean in on those call recordings. It's more common that calls are being recorded these days. We can coach after the fact. So kind of the Monday morning, hey, how'd the call go? Well, play that back to me. What questions did you ask? How did the customer respond? We can really dig in. Even if we weren't there, we can investigate and get in there. And then we can also do, typical role plays, sales simulations, different ways that we can practice. And Julie, I know you're implementing some really interesting, video technology and other ways to leverage that in a practice setting, right? Where now maybe we can try that role play. And maybe you want to speak to that, but anything else you're seeing and, kind of how you can practice coaching in this hybrid world?
Yeah, I'm seeing a couple things. I mean, one is related to the support of, that functionality supporting kind of what I'll say like is a low stakes practice where I, as a sales individual, can get on and record myself giving a pitch, and I can, get auto analysis feedback, right? Am I saying 50,000 times? Am I using the keywords that describe this product, right? Am I doing the things that I need to do as much as I possibly can on my own to prepare for this call and really enhance and improve my skills? Another side of that is the more of like the higher stakes, what I'll say, practice, where I'm being recorded and, Ray, my coach, is going to come in and he's going to watch this and he's going to provide feedback. Or if we think about making that scalable, my peers are going to go in and I'm going to watch theirs and they're going to watch mine. And now, maybe that makes me a little nervous at first, but, we're a learning culture. We're a coaching culture now because we do coaching and it's an integral part of our business. And so I'm really, improving myself by listening to others, and they're able to improve by reviewing my content, right? So I think it's all just, it goes back to the really criticalness of coaching and making it a part of your coaching, of your culture as an organization. And that being such a key part of what you do, and the ability to support what I'll say coaching, in the moment, coaching live, coaching as you're doing your job day to day. And you guys do such a great job of that.
No, and lots of great opportunities. And I love that, the idea of let's practice, let's get feedback from our peers. And, as we always joke, if you're not doing some sort of simulation or role play, or maybe in your team meetings, practicing, it really means people are practicing on your clients. And, as we know, that's a really expensive way to do training. I think I heard somebody else say that once, but it is, right? It means we're practicing on these opportunities that we probably don't have enough of anyway. And so let's create a safe environment. And then there's something that is really unique about the peer-to-peer coaching that says, oh, I'm going to listen to Julie because I respect her as a salesperson. I know what she's done in the, with her clients. And that perspective may be even more valuable than that sales leader or manager that says, no, do it this way because I said so, or, I think you should change. So yeah, that collaboration, and now maybe you can go back and forth with the individual and get some
Right.
feedback and share your results. I think that's really extremely valuable.
Yeah. And because it's remote, right? If you think about maybe how this kind of peer-to-peer coaching took place previously, you're in your office and you're chatting with those that sit around you, or the people that have become your friends now at work, right? When you go to lunch and you share stories, and isn't just about coaching, it's about all learning, really, right? We're sharing stories, and I'm saying, oh, hey, Bill, I had this issue, this sales objection the other day, and I didn't know how to handle it. How do you handle that? And then I get to hear Bill's story. But in a digital environment, I can ask that question to a really broad, diverse audience that I may not have reached before. And I can get all sorts of input from them. So it's just taking that informal learning that goes on too, and making a record of that and expanding your audience. So you're learning from such a larger group of individuals than before, which I have seen be really, really successful and change the game.
Absolutely. And Julia, just a side on that, I'll share a quick story. So we've been doing public sessions, so open sessions on the Intrepid platform, where we're offering our managing performance, or right now we have a selling to key executives program going on. We have a sales coaching program coming up in March. And what was really interesting with that mixed group, and these are large cohorts going through together, but cross industries, multiple companies, big and small, enterprise, all the way up to, Fortune 50 companies have participants in these sessions. And somebody came back and said, we enjoyed the collaboration with the other companies so much. We want to do that for our team. We don't want a private session. We actually appreciated hearing from different industries and how they were accomplishing these same challenges, but from a different perspective, and hadn't really anticipated that. I mean, we're going to continue those open sessions, but there's trade-offs, because it's great to have a private group where you can really lean in on your particular sales challenges or personnel challenges. But by the same token, yes, they can learn from others with a completely different perspective, and they very much valued that, up to the very senior level.
Yeah, get you thinking outside the box. And I do know some organizations that not organizations, I should say individuals, sales individuals that sometimes push back on the whole role play thing. They don't like it. It makes them uncomfortable, whatever. And I've seen organizations handle this various ways. And I think kind of that lower stakes, let me practice, to now I feel comfortable and other people can see what I have done and they can comment, is interesting. And Ray, I meant to tell you this the other day. We haven't had a chance to talk about it, but one of the organizations that we work with has recently tied sales incentives to their to learning and in Intrepid. And I had a little bit of like a ooh, because for years people, they talk about this, and I've honestly not seen it go that well in many places, but I think in the learning environment that we're in now, it's a little bit different. And as long as you do it right, and learning is at the heart of what you do, it can be different. So anyway, side note there, but yeah. I just found that really interesting.
No, I love that. And yeah, talk about sending the message that this is important and we're investing and we want you to pay attention, right? And I mean, we love in our programs being able to have the sales leader kick off, and maybe that's a short video or embedding that in the platform, but say, we're making a big investment. We believe in you and we want you to pay attention. And, if it's a Credly badge at the end or a credential, but we want you to complete the program. We want you to go through and really be intentional. And, then they, I think, do get more out of it because of that. But no, that's great. I'd love to chat more about that at some point.
I'm sure we will.
Yeah. So, well, let's continue on. So if we believe coaching's important, we're going to do it in this hybrid world. And we really want to reinforce that collaborative learning and that coaching framework. We're going to talk about using collaborative learning as a way of creating this training experience. So I wanted to take an opportunity to get input from the group again, specifically around delivering training. So what is your primary modality to deliver training in 2022? And if you could just chat in, are you going back in ILT, VLT, so instructor-led, virtual instructor-led? Are you using some collaborative or peer-to-peer? I mean, people define things differently, and that's fine. Right. That's why we're doing this as a chat and not a poll. But I'd love to see what our audience is going to do to deliver their training this year. What are you seeing from your clients, Julie?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me that. And my head went immediately to like, well, kind of a mix, right? Not surprising because we're seeing a mix in the return to on-site work, right? Some people are doing it, some people aren't. Like, it's all over the place, but digital is going to stay a part of that. And it's going to be a bigger part of that. And it's not to say that ILT is going away. It's not, I don't think it should. There's so much value in being in person that, you can't replace all of that value, right? There's something different about being in person. And if we're going to say otherwise, I think, we're being a little bit naive, but
right.
It's being more intentional about those instructor-led sessions and who that audience is, right? And when we think about digitizing content, it's thinking about the audience and who can benefit from that content. And now maybe who would have been sitting in that ILT classroom, maybe we could take that content. Now, everyone can benefit from that content, right? People who wouldn't have been able to travel and come. And so it's a mix of whether they're going back to ILT or not. I think more ILT is going to be part of 2022 and than before. And I think I'm seeing some of that here in the chat, right? It's a little bit of a mix. It's blended. We're seeing some VILT, some peer-to-peer, but I'm seeing a lot of virtual, which doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I think out of necessity, right, is like, well, that's
right.
what we're going to have to do because, it's hard to plan an event 6 months out and know what the environment's going to look like. What I will say that we've seen, and I think the industry is seeing, is there is fatigue out there. We knew early on there was Zoom fatigue, there's VILT fatigue, and even, I think there's digital, online. It's like, oh, wow, another program. And do I have to dedicate time? So I think we need to continue to up our game to make it that much more engaging, to make it more collaborative. And we're going to get to that. And I think one of the things we've seen with our VILT is the more we can use those for coaching and application sessions. Mm-hmm. So in other words, as somebody mentioned, flipping the classroom, but if they've watched the videos or they've done an assignment and then they're coming in to talk about the skill application, that's a very different experience than I'm going to lecture for 2 hours on Zoom and you're going to do your email and shop Amazon, right? So I think we need to think about how we're using those sessions and try to make them, as we call them ARC sessions now. So application, reinforcement, and coaching. And I think it changes, right? It kind of changes the connotation. And we still do some traditional VILT, but if we're doing a blend, then those are ARC sessions. They're really coaching focused on the application piece.
I love that because you're tailoring it to your audience then, right? As much as you can.
Oh, and they love seeing others work. We highlight some showcase, Academy Award kind of, hey, here was a great example, or here's a good a case study or call plan that somebody has done. So, well, let's talk about, I know Intrepid has done some research around this in terms of learner preference. And can you just talk about, what you've seen in terms of what the learners value these days?
Yeah, just with the nature of what we do, we were trying to get some more formal data. So what we started doing is delivering this annual, what's it called? State of high stakes learning survey to 1,000+ learners out there. Wow. And then we also interview CLOs and do something else. And there are a lot of things that are a part of this survey, not just what you're seeing in front of you, but also, what are the topics that are really important to you? And what's the best part of online learning? What's the worst part of online learning, right? So it's not just this, but what I wanted to demonstrate here is that we asked these people how they prefer, to consume content online, right? And is it asynchronous? Is it synchronous? Is it through one-on-one coaching? And that could be in a variety of modalities online, right? I'll make an assumption that it's probably mostly virtual live, but you can see collaborative is a big part of that, and peer-to-peer is a big part of that, and coaching is a big part of that. So as we look at evolving our programs and digitizing them, we really need to be very focused in not listening to the learner about how they prefer to work, but listening to the learner and how they prefer to learn. And it's collaboratively, and that doesn't surprise me, because we've known forever, right, that people prefer to learn from their peers, right? They prefer to learn from each other. They prefer to learn in a group, which is why ILT has historically always been so successful, because you're there and you're in a group and you're having really meaningful interactions with people that have that sort of human element, right? But we've got to be able to replicate that as much as we possibly can in a digital environment. I think another interesting takeaway from this was that, what was it, last year, over 80% of people felt that their organization did deliver learning that was critical to their role. I mean, that's a big change from years ago, right? And that learners felt that the worst part of their digital learning experience within their organization was that they felt alone, right? They felt that they were on their own and really segregated from other people, and they didn't like that. And the best parts of the learning experience really, support this here, which is the opportunity to interact and collaborate with other people, but also to kind of go at their own pace and to be able to revisit content when they needed to. So we really want to listen to that and make sure we're delivering. And Ray, to your point, we're on the hot seat now in L&D and in this industry. We're on the hot seat. Like, this has got to be great training, or engagement levels are going to be low. People are, to your point again, Zoom fatigue, just total remote online learning fatigue, right? We've got to up our game.
Yeah, no, and it's great. And I'm glad you kind of defined, and we're going to get into a little bit more about collaborative learning, because I think you're right. We've always done that to some degree, though, as we know, some ILT is much more collaborative than others. And
right.
If it's 8 hours of lecture, that probably doesn't feel too collaborative. But if we're accomplishing real tasks and activities and working in small groups, and that was the essence. The challenge and goal now is, how do we replicate that in this blended and hybrid environment, and maybe even do it differently and better when we can leverage things like discussion groups and social and some of those things that help us engage. So maybe you could walk us through talking a little bit about what do we mean by collaborative and how you implement it at Intrepid.
Yeah, I think people hear collaborative learning, and maybe not as much now, but a year ago, there was certainly this kind of like, well, what is that? And if you look on the screen and you look at this visual representation of collaborative learning, it's like, it's so many things. And it is so many things, right? But what we mean by collaborative learning is that it's a digital blended experience that really emphasizes interaction and opportunities to create cohorts that meet learner demands for learnings, right? Where these meaningful interactions and collaborations and the learner experience are at the heart and soul of the learner journey. So if you think about creating digital content where the content itself is at the heart of the learning, that's not what we're talking about here. I hate to be super repetitious, but we're listening to the learner, and the learner needs to be at the center of this. And we had talked a little bit about engagement and getting people to feel that the learning that they're taking is critical. I shared that stat from before, right? Over 80% of people felt that they took some sort of online training that was critical to their role. And there are ways to make sure that the learning that you're delivering touches on that. And I won't get into a ton of detail on that here today, but I think the key things are making sure that you're providing relevancy for the learner. We always use this term ruthless relevancy around here, but they really need to feel that the learning is going to impact them as an individual in their role. And they need to see the big picture, how them learning this content is going to impact organizations, because that's the whole point, right? We're trying to change behaviors here and drive organizational change and impact the business and bring in more revenue. We have all these goals that we're trying to meet. So ruthless relevancy is certainly a part of that. Providing contextual elements is a huge part of that. And providing those interactive, collaborative elements as an entire, in the entirety of the learning journey, instead of being, and I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself here on the next slide, but instead of being, kind of an afterthought to the learner experience. So, I mean, that's why we exist, Intrepid, in the space, right? It's a very anyone who knows anything about the industry knows that the digital learning tech industry is very saturated. But where we play and the gap that we are trying to fill is around, what if we do need to replace ILT, right? What if we can't deliver ILT? How do we take that and digitize it and not give up all the meaningful human interaction, all the goodness and richness of that experience?
Right. And maybe even expand it, right? Because you're doing it as a learning
Exactly.
journey over a period of time with more space and thoughtfulness in between. And then there were a couple of comments that I just wanted to respond to. One was from Elena, and I don't know if this went to everyone, but I think it's worth pointing out that to your point about, the L&D challenge and internal motivation and the drive, that collaborative learning and peer-to-peer can help to increase the interaction and drive motivation. I think it's such an important point that if I'm going through this as a cohort, maybe it's a little peer pressure, plus I value that experience. Now I've created something that I'm going to lean in on again a little bit more than, I have to show up for this session again. And it really relates to, Rory had a comment about, or a question about, are there tips for assessments in the virtual space to maintain validity and integrity, right? If you have a training process, how do you ensure that you're actually delivering the goods? I think is really what he's getting towards. And, what I think is also a really exciting development we've seen with some of our large tech clients, for instance, is making the peer review part of the completion. So it's not just you have to complete a final project or exercise. For sales, it's easy to think about. Maybe you have to do an extensive call plan or a sales presentation. So you have to complete that as part of the criteria to finish the program, but you also have to review 2 or 3 of your peers and give them feedback. And that is part of the requirement to complete the program. So now you've encouraged that, plus they see each other's work and it's like, oh, wow, I learned something because I saw how Julie approached this problem. And so I think if we can clearly define the outcome we're looking for and then build that into the program design, and in the Intrepid case, the points and the badges and the completion criteria, now we can go back and say, well, no, now we know that 85% of the people satisfied these criteria. And guess what? They were very satisfied with the experience as they went through. That's kind of the gold standard.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of ways, Rory, to, maintain the integrity and the validity. And part of that, we're talking about peer-to-peer review is making sure that you have a rubric, right? So people, you get rid of that whole subjective versus objective issue, and people are, grading or peer reviewing based on the same criterion. And so there's a lot of other ways to do that. But while we're talking about peer-to-peer review, that's certainly one of them. And Elena, yes, I think that decline in L&D is part of the fatigue. And it's part of sort of, if you think about standard e-learning modalities, I think that's where the fatigue is, right? I don't want to sit alone in front of my computer and watch, a 45-minute video and then go sit in on a 4-hour VILT. So we just really need to think about that. And I love what you said about collaboration, sort of driving people to be engaged and to be motivated. That's great.
Yeah, no, I think we're seeing a lot of really interesting developments there. So I want to be sensitive to our time. We just wanted to give kind of a sneak peek of how this all pulls together. So maybe you can talk about, what's different about this from traditional LMS, and,
Sure.
we'll show some examples here.
Sure. And I could talk about this all day, but I also want to be mindful of the time. And I know people love seeing examples of okay, well, this sounds good. What does this look like? So I'm not going to say a whole lot about this because I think I've pretty much touched on it already, right? Why can't we use sort of our LMS or traditional e-learning modalities? And really it comes down to that, the LMS is centered on the content, right? Its job is to deliver content and manage the users. Its job is not to listen to the learners and create a rich and engaging learning experience. And science backs up why those things are so important. And you can see some of those examples in front of you. We talked about relevancy, about giving contextual elements, about giving the opportunity, providing the opportunity to collaborate. So, that's the gist of it. But, we really need to make sure that we are fitting in to the existing online learning tech ecosystem. So that's an important part of what we do as well.
Right. And just to clarify, and I think it's good to clarify terms, I saw a question. So if we're thinking about LMS as traditional learning management systems, So you think about where you would typically go to consume and also, frankly, keep track of training. So a lot of organizations, frankly, it's kind of compliance and record keeping and have you satisfied this criteria. I think where Intrepid and others are going is this idea of a learning experience platform that says this is really more about the experience as you go through the training and that engagement and how we consume the content, right? So a combination of video, social, email. We're going to talk about that shortly, but I don't know if you've add anything, but I'll walk through kind of how we interpret that.
No, I think you've got it, and I think seeing it really helps, right? It's thinking outside of just delivering content, but how do we actually change behaviors? And that's the stuff.
Right. So this is kind of a map of how we implement and how we look at it. So in a digital blend, we branded this internally as a collaborative learning experience, right? So our CLX experience or CLX programs. And so what we've done is we've taken all of our sales and sales management programs and we've broken those down. So we have micro learning, which is 3 to 5 minute videos, very short excerpts that they can consume the content. And we often do customized what we call voice of the seller content. So people talk about voice of the learner. Well, this is voice of the seller. Let's go interview the top sellers, ask how they accomplish or tackle these challenges, and then curate that so that they're learning from their peers or their colleagues who are doing, creative and interesting things, as opposed to, a talking head again, lecturing. So you have that content to start with. You have skill application. So that might be a mission or a field work or an assignment that they have to do, even creating their own video, skill application, as you mentioned, and then a chance to discuss and collaborate. So whether those are weekly or recurring, at least, where we're talking those ARC sessions, so the application review and coaching, and the peer-to-peer discussions around that. And that happens in the platform as well. So think about, hey, you can post a question, or there may be a prompt each week saying, respond, how would you handle this challenge? So they're really being thoughtful about how they're applying those skills. And then they have all the tools and resources available in the platform, and ultimately a way of tracking. So that leaderboard gamification piece where, hey, let's make sure that they know where they stand. And we've been quite impressed with just how competitive people are to gain those points and get on the leaderboard or make sure that they're trending and on track to complete the program. So it gives a very visible way of seeing how they're doing relative to their peers and completing the program. So this is kind of our roadmap, if you will, to how we think of that collaborative experience. So I'm just going to show a couple of examples because people always ask, well, what does this really mean? This has all been kind of conceptual. But this is an example of our Selling to Key Executives, in this case, program, just a landing page. It's very user-friendly. People easily, can navigate, kind of get around it. And the idea that you're going to see where you are, you're going to see the others in the program. And then we release the content over time. So this is our coaching program. You can see we talk about the coaching mindset. We talk about analyzing your team. We talk about coaching and then overcoming coaching challenges. So that might be released over 3 or 4 weeks. And then each of these blue bars is an accordion, if you will, but a content area that expands where we might have a video, we might have a resource that they can download or view, and then an activity that's related to each of those, the coaching mindset or assessing a team member. So it really guides them through in a very user-friendly way. And, I think helps with that experience. I can come in here at any time, know where I left off, consume the material, and then you see the what to expect and the ask the expert. So at any time they can engage in a discussion about one of the assignments or a problem that they may be having or a challenge and get feedback. And we find those are really active. I mean, it's great when we see very thought-provoking questions. They may not be directly related to the topic, but people are engaging and applying, trying to try it on themselves, right? And figure out how it works. So I'll just cover one other piece because this is kind of a fun one, and then I'd love to get your thoughts too. One of the pieces, since we've talked about collaboration, is getting the team working together. So this is just a snapshot of one of the first activities is to introduce yourself and not with a formal kind of LinkedIn profile, but talk about a memorable moment, maybe your goal for the program or something challenging, and a fun picture or something that talks a little bit about yourself. And so in global companies we've worked with, this is so fun to see people connecting that have never met before. And they realize, oh, we're dealing with the same challenges, we have the same interests, and now we're collaborating in a different way and really creating that cohort of colleagues, right, that can work together as they go through the program. Anything you'd add to this, Julie? I mean, I know this is nothing new to you, but it's always kind of fun to see.
No, I love this. And I've seen organizations do so many things with this, right? Like, you had to listen to one song for the rest of your life. What would it be? Why are you here? Why are you excited about this? Why are you not excited about it? I mean, so many things. And it just makes you feel like you're really tied in to this group of people. And it gets people having conversations about that song and about other things. And, those are the kind of conversations that you would have in person. So it's great to see that. And I think we made a really strong effort to support a consumer experience in the platform, right? So we didn't want this to look like a learning platform. We wanted this to look like any other sort of website that you would access or an app that you would use, right? We needed this to be really intuitive for learners. And you've done such a great job with the experience and with the design. I mean, it's really stellar.
Well, and I will say it is valuable, and you're right. We might do this as an icebreaker at the start of a 2-day in person, but it's always kind of rushed and you don't have as much time. And sometimes it really resonates and people want to spend all morning, right, connecting with each other. Well, they can do it throughout. They can come back and say, oh, I want to go back and look at Julie's profile because there was something that was interesting. You can also see how they've engaged in the program. So you can, kind of follow people, if you will, as they go through their assignments. So I won't read you the feedback, but what I love about some of these quotes is, they're talking about learning from others. They're talking about doing real activities as they're going through the program. So applying it to kind of real life situations, getting real feedback, and, really being able to engage with others. And we've had some great stories. I mean, somebody came back from a session we ran in December and said, hey, we closed the largest deal in company history doing this as we went through this program and applying these skills. And obviously we love those kind of stories as they come out because it was a direct result, or he felt it was a direct result of some of the skills he'd learned. So, capturing the anecdotal and, the real feedback is great.
That's huge. That's very exciting. I love these, right? Because you want to hear from the people who are actually going through the program.
Yep. So, again, we're coming up on the top of the hour. Just wanted to show you a couple of quick snapshots. There's a lot on this page, but it shows you an idea of a learning path. And why I wanted to include this one is this is our whole High Impact Sales Manager Academy. So you can actually think of this as 5 different programs that could be time released, right? Could be dripped out. We have clients going through this over a year as an academy, or doing it as a 8 to 10 week journey, kind of all you can eat, or over a period of a quarter. But you go through the ARC sessions, as I mentioned, those application sessions are interspersed, and then they're getting badges for each component, and it kind of shows the breadth of a program like that. But it allows you to be really modular with how you deliver that training, and depending on the appetite and other priorities. And, maybe we do need to slow down a little bit and focus because they still need to be out there selling at the same time. So there was a quick question from Elena, and I love this, about live trainings. Do you record and share them in the platform? And I have a personal opinion and love to get your thoughts, but I think those can be really valuable if you have, I'd say, a good digital team that can curate and edit. So maybe you take some snapshots and you boil that hour long down into, well, here's 5 or 10 minutes. I would not put 8 hours of stand-up training into the platform and expect people to watch it, because chances are they're not. And it's going to be probably pretty boring if they weren't there anyway. But maybe you do the kickoff, or maybe you do the setup for an engagement, or maybe you do one example of a role play that happened, and that's great. But I wouldn't try to just take ILT and plug it in and say, okay, now go watch this and you'll get the same experience. Even with VILT, a 2-hour VILT can be really challenging to watch if you weren't there, right? And weren't engaged in the discussion. Do you have other thoughts on that, Julie?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you have an hour or less VILT session, do I think that you should record it and put it in the platform? Yes, I do. Right. I mean, we want to meet learners where they are. And if there's someone who can't attend that day because they had a family emergency or whatever, right? For whatever reason they couldn't be there, they can go back and watch them. I think part of that too is making sure that your VILT sessions are really focused. So that person wants to watch it. They don't want to miss out on that. I've also seen people record because they want to meet different time zone needs. And so there is a way to set up user groups in the platform so that you have sessions that meet different time zones and all sorts of ways in which you can solve for that, solve for that scenario.
And I should clarify, we do record those ARC sessions, those are only 60 minutes, those review sessions, because we realize that we can't make them mandatory, or it's tough to do with different time zones, and especially with sellers that are out in the field, but they can go back and reference, or, maybe they watch them on 1.5 speed and consume that. But yeah,
but they won't watch a 2-hour VILT. Like, if you right, they're not going to watch that.
Or an 8-hour stand-up. So anyway, we covered a lot of ground. I know we're at the top of the hour, but the point we wanted to leave with is just that, hey, we think hybrid and blend is here to stay, and we need to be adapting. And we need to tie that into this trend of how do we focus on retaining our top sellers, our top employees, and that really coaching and engaging them and skill development is key. So how do we do that to attract and retain, and using tools like Intrepid and collaborative learning, and then we know that the workforce really prefers and demands and is looking towards that as we go forward.